Welcome into a new edition of Going Deep Buffalo. I'm your host, Kevin Massare, here with Kevin Siracuse to talk about everything that we have learned over the last few weeks. Kevin and I are back in action. We have a pretty loaded lineup today. We're going to talk some Panthers talk in just a little bit. Bills, Panthers, what are we looking for in that game? Going to be a ton of fun. We have my guy, Jared Feinberg, on from not only the Panthers Wire, the Jags Wire. So he's got some pretty good insight on what's going on. They may play their starters. So we have some stuff to talk about on the Panthers front, as well as going through a huge injury report from banged up Bills, and Dr. Kyle Trimble come on at the top of the hour at 9:00 to break down some of his injury updates and notes that we've seen from practice. So we'll have all of that coming at you in the next 90 minutes. But first and foremost, this show is brought to you by the Summit Center for some of the best autism care in Western New York. Check out the Summit Center.
The show is also brought to you by Dave Dengler and the Larson-Timko Funeral Home in Fredonia. Larson-Timko Funeral Home offering 100% fully guaranteed price and pre-arranged funeral plans with live streaming available. You can give them a call at 716-679-9000 or visit their website at larsontimkofuneralhome.com.
Kevin, let's spend about 5 to 10 minutes real briefly. I know we're about, 3 or 4 days out now from the game where the Bills played some pretty solid. We haven't been on since I was on the post-game show with Lance Nelson and banged up. We were talking about a lot of the injuries, that we saw from banged up Bills, who we'll have on later, but also we were talking about all the performances that we have seen and more. But we got to get your opinion. I've been on the post-game show, so we're going to leave it with you. Some of the final things that you saw from that game, some of the notes that you noticed, what you wanted to get through. So we'll kind of touch on that real briefly, and then that'll kind of transition us with you, Jared, on the show, kind of talk about what's to look forward to at this weekend. But kind of let's start with your initial reactions to what you saw from the Bills. Pretty nice looking victory, 9-3.
Well, 2 words: Joe Andreessen. That was like my main takeaway. I mean, I had other takeaways from the game, like the defensive line looked good. There were some players that stood out who I tweeted about afterwards. But Joe Andreessen kind of took that game over, and it was really cool to see, considering that he's the local hometown kid. And just like the story that he has and the path that he took to get there. I mean, we're going to talk about this tonight, but he like legit has a shot to make the 53-man roster now. Yeah, and like before, I'll admit, I'm sure you'll feel the same way. Like, I didn't even think that he could sniff the 53. Like, I thought he would be a nice practice squad player, but like considering that the Bills were pretty healthy. So we thought, you had healthy Matt Milano, healthy Terrell Bernard coming back. They really built up that linebacker room, so you didn't have to call AJ Klein coming out of his RV again. I was like, there's no shot that this kid makes the roster. But I walked out of the stadium because I was there in Pittsburgh on Saturday, and I walked out thinking, like, he really might make this team.
Yeah. And we got, just so you guys know, we got Dr. Kyle coming on shortly. He'll be on in the show in about 40 minutes. He'll be here at the top of the hour. So stay tuned for that portion of it. But yeah, as we talked about on the post-game show, the Built in Buffalo post-game show with Lance Nelson and myself, I just don't think you can keep him off the roster. I think that there'd be enough film out there that somebody else will give him a shot. We'll see what happens. I'm assuming he's going to get another load of playing time here against the Panthers. What was impressive, Kevin, was Buffalo Joe was doing this against the starters, Jalen Warren, also Justin Fields, in a heated competition for the number 1 quarterback battle. He wasn't going against like Kyle Allen and real extreme backups. He was going against tackling Jalen Warren in open field, something the Bills, throughout time have struggled with in general. So it wasn't just a simple task of like playing against the 3s and the 4s and guys just look good against like a backup running back does, look good against everybody else's backups. He looked like he legitimately was the Bills starting linebacker next to Dorian Williams, and that he was Terrell Bernard almost. So I think that's one of the biggest things to take away from that is I personally think it's enough film to where somebody would take a shot on him. I'm not 100% sure you can get him through waivers, where I know for sure you can get a bunch of other players through waivers. And we'll talk about that kind of at the end of the show, kind of our wrap-up thoughts when we get through some of the injury stuff with Dr. Kyle Trimble later. But what else did you notice besides Joe Andreessen? The Bills defense played really well. The run game looked good. It's looked good in practice all week here. They've been said to making huge strides. And I've also been hearing stuff that Joe Brady's been not showing anything deliberately in preseason, so that no one really has any idea what his offense is going to look like. And ultimately, as we talk to Jared here in a few moments, I don't think it's a bad thing that the Bills will be keeping Josh Allen off of the field. So that's one of the biggest notes that I have is that like there's enough injuries now, and we'll go through them all. here and on all the updates and what we're thinking of play for return. But when it comes to the roster projections, I just don't think you can play the ones. But the running game looked mightily good against Pittsburgh. And the defense in general, like, look, you had Ingram making plays. You had, from across the board, you had Hardy making plays. The DBs looked good. The linebacking, though, that they were getting pressure. Greg Rousseau, like, Kevin, you got to be pretty encouraged what you've seen. And that's the side. And the Bills defense played good at week 1, too. It was just weird. They got a bunch of points late against the threes after turnover and downs from backup offensive players. But what are your other reactions besides Joe Andreessen?
Yeah, so I tweeted after the game some players who stood out to me. So I'll just kind of list those right now. So one was obviously Joe Andreessen. 2, I had Kingsley Jonathan. I thought he really popped, specifically later in the game. I thought he made a couple of really nice plays to really stand out and be like, okay. I saw him on special teams too. So there's a role that he could be carving out. You mentioned Jamarcus Ingram. He had a really nice pass defense. I believe that was in the first half. I could be wrong, but he was all around the ball when he was on the field. And you mentioned the run game. I listed Ray Davis, and then I had Darrington Evans / Frank Gore Jr. just because everyone looked good. Like, I couldn't decide between Evans and Gore. So I just listed both of them because I feel like you could list either one as that 5th player who really stood out.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. I was really encouraged by everything. Like, the biggest discouragement was really, and he got injured, was Mitchell Trubisky. But I feel like we're always bummed by whether it's Case Keenum or Kyle Allen. Really, the first time we've ever been really encouraged was the first go around where Mitch Trubisky got his contract in Pittsburgh the year prior to that. Outside of that, like, I don't think we've ever really cared or been encouraged by whoever's behind Josh Allen. So I can't sit here and say, like, oh my God, people were saying, like, we want Kyle Allen back. And I'm like, it's the same thing. Like, I don't know how you can be that. And maybe we'll go over some quarterback options at some point here tonight. But realistically, I just don't really care enough because the season, even on a short-term basis, I don't really know the margin of error between Mitchell Trubisky and someone that may be better, how many more games that player is going to ultimately win. But outside of Mitchell Trubisky, like, I thought the team played pretty solid. Like, they ran the ball really well. The offensive line was really encouraging. That was what I was expecting to see. The defense basically shut Justin Fields, who was playing for a starting job, late into the 4th quarter. They weren't playing backup quarterbacks. He was trying to earn the starting job against the Bills defense, and he just couldn't figure out a way. That has to be encouraging to you as you hit week 1. And as we talk to Dr. Kyle, some of these injured players coming back, it seems relatively soon.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on the Steelers quarterback situation? Not to go down that rabbit hole, but I mean, to your point, like, the Bills defense, specifically backups and even third strings, like Justin Fields did not look good at all. Russell Wilson, like, okay, he managed the offense, but I mean, the Steelers are 0-2. Have they scored a touchdown yet this year?
I think do they have one or no? Or do they not have one either? I don't know. I mean, but they played a lot of starters minutes. I mean, you even had Pickens in the game, going deep into the game, like making, he made the Jamarcus Ingram made the play against Pickens late in the game, or excuse me, late in the half that you were referencing on the pass breakup. So I mean, they don't look good. That team does not look very good, in my personal opinion. Their defense will probably always be super solid, kind of like the Bills, no matter what their personnel is. And but when it comes to that offense, I don't see much from Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Dez Fitzpatrick. I mean, it's beside George Pickens, it's just not a very good offense.
And aren't there reports that Brandon Ayuk and the 49ers are, like, closing in on a deal, or at least like they're kind of talking in that way? So it seems like Pittsburgh is kind of out of the loop now.
I think so. From the sounds of it, yeah.
They need another piece on offense because it just looks so stale. I know they moved on from Matt Canada, but, like, you replace him with Arthur Smith. I don't know. Yeah, I do have a question for you.
Yeah, shoot.
Before we get Jared on, I see some people are talking about it in the comments. I want to talk about the backup quarterback situation because the other takeaway that I had, and this was pretty much, I mean, there were other takeaways, but the 3 main ones were Joe Andreessen, the defense looking good in general. And then the third thing that I tweeted was that the Bills may have a backup quarterback issue. Sure. And that was before Trubisky went down. And I think you tweeted something along the same lines. Like, I don't know, man. Like, Trubisky just doesn't seem to have it.
He doesn't. And like, yeah, I mean, the issue with me is like, I've kind of reflected on it, and ultimately, like, the Bills could cut him. They could save a little bit of money, but then they'd have to pay a new quarterback anyway, so wouldn't be any savings. Ultimately, the material difference between Mitchell Trubisky, who knows Josh and can break down film with Josh, and ultimately, like, as you reflect on it, the on the field performance is not at all what the backup quarterback does. Like, of course, like, if your starter is hurt, you're not signing. Like, a lot of people think you're signing a 1B, and in the Bills, Mahomes, even like a couple other quarterbacks case, maybe the Bengals are a little different because Joe Burrow misses seasons occasionally. Like, you're not really signing a guy to play. Like, if that player has to play, I don't know how many games you're going to win regardless. Like, the Bills are not going to take out a larger insurance policy than Mitchell Trubisky. Like, that is the insurance policy they're willing to take out. They're hoping that, like, he can maybe go 1-1 in a 2-game stretch. But if you're talking about an 8-game stretch, like, it's just over. Like, I'm sorry. Like, they're not going to be able to acquire somebody outside unless someone's sitting on free agency. Then you give Ryan Tannehill a call or something. But ultimately, I just don't even know where he's at his point of his career either. So I do believe he's not very good. But what he does do is break down defenses to a way that is effective. He must be able to talk to Josh in a way he understands. And it's all about what he's comfortable with in the room, because they do a lot and break down, things on the Surface Pro. Like, it's all about that more than it is like what his on the field performance looks like in a 4-game stretch. Like, the Bills would be very lucky if they can go 2-2 in a stretch where Mitchell Trubisky had to play. And I don't think that there's anybody on the market or that the Bills could even be sniffed close to acquiring that could be better than that outside of like Heineke. He's a guy I really like if for some reason he became free, but there's not a lot of guys I like, Kevin.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because Jody Biasi from WGR tweeted this today, and I want to bring it up here. So I didn't realize the amount of backup quarterbacks who are like now third stringers thanks to this rookie class. So that's what he said. Current third string quarterbacks who could be options for the Bills at number 2. Tyler Huntley. He's like the number 3 or 4 option right now in Cleveland, because they have Deshaun Watson. They signed Jameis Winston. They still have Dorian Thompson.
Robinson. Yep. DTR.
Yeah. DTR. And Tyler Huntley. Taylor Heineke is now behind Kirk Cousins and Michael Penix. Malik Willis, I mean, he's more of a project. Trey Lance, is he a third string in Dallas right now? Bailey Zappi's a third string. Zach Wilson, I mean, whatever. I don't really want Zach Wilson. PJ Walker's a third string in Seattle. So I'm thinking that, like, the Bills probably want to do what you said. They'll just kind of let it ride with Trubisky. We'll see what the injury diagnosis is. But I think they like that continuity. They'll probably want him to continue on with Josh. They signed him for a reason. And like you said, the separation isn't that great. But if I'm Brandon Beane, I'm seriously thinking about using that extra 6th-round pick that I have from the Boogie Basham trade last summer and saying, hey, we are willing to give this to you for Tyler Huntley. Because I break it down into quarters, and Sean McDermott alluded to this yesterday. If Josh Allen were forced to miss 4 games, who can get you to at least a 2-2 record, if not 3-1? And I don't know if Trubisky can. I think Tyler Huntley could. I think Taylor Heineke could. I think Trey Lance could. He's more of a project. He has some upside. Even Bailey Zappi. PJ Walker, maybe. And the guys on the bottom of the list, like Kyle Allen, been there, done that. Same with Case Keenum, Peterman, Jake Fromm. But like 1 through 7
Tanner McKee and down, no, there's really nothing there that the Bills could go. Zappi's the first name. Obviously, Zach Wilson, I actually kind of like. He's the one name on this list that they just traded for him. I doubt he'd be available of all these guys, but I actually like Zach Wilson as a QB too. He wins games as a backup. Like, he's not going to go 10-7 and make the playoffs. Absolutely not. But he's a guy that I actually really enjoy, that has been able to step in the past, especially if his offense is pretty decent. But ultimately, Huntley, I liked. Taylor Heineke, I like. Beathard's hurt, so they had Jacksonville just had to sign a quarterback themselves. Trey Lance, Jerry Jones just came out and said that they're not getting rid of. Actually, I don't know if that was today or yesterday. Like, Zappi's minorly interesting. Zach Wilson, I don't think those two are available. They could be, but it's really the 2 names at the top would be the only 2 that I'd be somewhat interested in. The problem with Heineke, my favorite guy, is that their number 1 quarterback, Kirk Cousins, is coming off of an Achilles, and their number 2 is a rookie. I just think that they'll be one of the few teams that probably keep 3, knowing those situations. So it really comes down to like Huntley, and if like Bailey Zappi was available. because they have Milton and Drake May. So I think really your two names that are the most realistic, maybe Zappe, maybe Huntley, and probably like PJ Walker. That's probably the list of 3.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, if I had to choose just based on who I think fits the mold, I would say Tyler Huntley and Taylor Heineke because they are those dual threat quarterbacks. They have a similar play style to Josh Allen. So you can kind of replicate that based on how he plays. And obviously there's only one Josh Allen, but I really like what Huntley and Heineke bring to the table. Now we have John in the comments saying, just wait until cutdown day. You don't need to make a trade. Sure. But if the Bills want to get ahead of it and say, we do have that extra 6th-round pick, we don't know if someone like Taylor Heineke is just going to get released to the streets. He might make the 53 because, like you said, with Kirk Cousins coming off that injury, Michael Penix being a rookie. So maybe you want to get ahead of the game and get him in the room a little bit sooner and say, you know what, this is worth it to us. Just in case something happens, let's go make a trade for Tyler Huntley right now rather than sitting back and waiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's possible the Bills could do something like that. You would need probably a guy toward the top of this list to make any sense. And I think Huntley may be the only guy that could be available in that kind of range of what we're looking for. So it'll be an interesting thing. We're going to talk to Dr. Kyle later to kind of break down what he thinks and how long-term that he thinks that this needs to be for. So that will be, and I wish we're going to talk about the Panthers here for a little bit and what to look forward to in this game, which we'll see. But I wish the Panthers maybe had a backup quarterback with the Bills-Panthers connection that could be available for trade. But they're in a similar boat where they're protecting their young upstart quarterback themselves. So they need as much veteran presence in their room as possible. And they have an interesting team developing up there. And I really like Bryce Young. He's one of my favorite players. I thought he would take a bigger leap than he did, but I still like the player. I still like the prospect, and I still like what he's going to be able to do potentially in Carolina. It was just, obviously the whole Stroud story kind of overshadowed everything last year in that regards in the quarterback battle. But the Bills have a game to play, and it's going to be interesting because the Bills have 5 to 10 players that are going to make this roster potentially based on their final performance against the Panthers. And we're going to see what the Panthers are going to do, or at least what the rumors or speculation is out of Carolina on how they may play this last game themselves with some roster spots and some growth up for grabs. But we're going to welcome our guest, a fan of the show, somebody that I enjoy, and anytime that we need to talk Panthers, we're going to bring up Jared Feinberg, also covering the NFL draft. Jared, you cover Panthers Wire. You do Jags Wire now, I saw with my guy over there. Jared, you're a busy man.
I am a busy man, and I'm also doing some freelance writing for a local newspaper that I grew up around. So, a lot of busy work over basically the next several months.
Is your heart a Panthers guy though? Like where? Like
my gosh, yes. And being able to write about the Jaguars is awesome because I am a Trevor Lawrence stan. Mm-hmm. So it helps being able to cover one of my favorite quarterbacks in this league. Mm-hmm. So being able to explore another team as like a non-fan, kind of like giving an objective view is nice instead of having a mostly somewhat subjective view of the Panthers. So that's going to be fun to do.
Yeah, well, congrats on the Jags. We'll have to follow along with that. And, they're still – last year they were a main competitor of the Bills. They fell off, didn't make the playoffs. So, but I think that they may have a path back. So maybe we'll have to cover you, get you on if they play the Jags this year. So maybe we'll have to get you on to talk Jags next time. We cross paths. But we got the Panthers this weekend here in Buffalo. It's going to be beautiful. Great time of year over here in Western New York. Tell me, just give me a brief, you don't have to get crazy, a brief synopsis on what's going on in Carolina. Like I mentioned, I'm a Bryce Young guy. I'd like to see him pass CJ Stroud at some point. I'm not a Texan fan at all. So hopefully the Jags take them down themselves. But give us what's going on in Carolina. I like some of the weapons they have put around him. I thought that was a successful idea with Xavier Legette. I like Adam Thielen a whole bunch. I thought the trade for Deontay Johnson was decent. So a guy I wanted the Bills to actually give you guys a call for was Terrence Marshall. So kind of tell me about what's going on in Carolina and bring us up to speed on what Bills fans who probably don't know a ton about what's going on should be looking out for Saturday.
So you're going to see a team that is playing very competitive football on the defensive side of the ball. And that's something more of a preview as what's to come this season. I think you're going to see a very competitive and feisty defense from Ejiro Evero, who is likely going to be a head coach next year, next head coaching cycle. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if this was his last season in Carolina. He's been terrific. But what I have seen in training camp, and as well as joint practices, I went to the Jets-Panthers joint practice and watched the game Saturday night, watched the game 2 weeks ago against the Patriots, and just seeing this defense compete and just play some very competitive football. These guys are elevated with their play. So I'm very encouraged about that. There's a lot of young pieces on that side of the ball because of the departures of Jeremy Chin, Frankie Louvu, and Brian Burns. But they also have some nice pieces. J.C. Horn, if he can stay healthy, Xavier Woods, Jordan Fuller, Shaq Thompson, Josie Jewell, Jadeveon Clowney, Derek Brown, probably Carolina's best player. Offensively, there is a very obvious improvement offensively. From the offensive line to quarterback play to scheme to playmaking ability. Like, this has been very encouraging to see. And now there was a little bit of some anxiety heading into the Panthers-Jets joint practice because fans were like, what's this offense? What do we know about this offense? And they had a great day against the Jets defense in joint practice, which was encouraging to see. And also you saw a little bit of some off-platform ability in this scheme. You're going to see a little bit of Young moving out of the pocket, out of structure within the scheme. It's a scheme that I think Dave Canales, the head coach, has formed to make sure each player works with their strengths. That's one of his biggest things this year, is working with his players' strengths and what they do well. And to see that Bryce Young, especially probably since the Jets practice, has been on a tear in practice. So it's been very great to see this offense improve and show growth overall. So could I see this team triple their wins this year? Absolutely. But I'm not expecting, this team to be 4-13 or whatever. This is going to be closer to middle pack, in my opinion.
It's very interesting to notice. Just give us an update. What's the plan for playing time in Buffalo? What we can expect to see from the Panthers? Are they following? And I believe he was asked if he's going to follow suit or has something to do with what McDermott is obviously not playing his starters. He has in the past, Sean, but with the Bills' rash of injuries and their important season coming up, he just doesn't see the material benefit. What's going to happen in Carolina? Are we going to see some of those names you just mentioned, or where are we at as of right now?
So at the moment, it's still to be determined. Dave Canales has mentioned that he would like to try and get some starters in this Saturday, but it'll just depend on how practice goes this week, if they can stay healthy. I think the last 2 weeks, the issue for Carolina in terms of playing their starters, or basically not playing their starters, has been health along their entire depth. They've been dealing with injuries. They've had to go out and just basically maneuver the entire bottom of their roster to accommodate to some of the lack of talent they have at the bottom of the roster and at some positions. Against the Patriots, Panthers only had about 6 or 7 healthy offensive linemen once the game was finished, and that was a huge concern. They went out and signed Jack Anderson, a depth player who I believe was with the Eagles the last time, if I'm not mistaken, and he ended up having one of the better performances from any Panther this past weekend. So it looks like he might be a lock to make the roster, if not the practice squad. So I think this week, as long as it's a clean bill of health, you'll see some of the Panthers starters play. I don't know if Bryce Young will play. I don't know if Andy Dalton will play. But if Bryce were to play, I would expect Dalton to get a couple series in while Jack Plummer takes over for the majority of the game. That's been the case for the last 2 weeks. Jack Plummer has been trying to improve each week. He's shown improvement as an undrafted free agent from Louisville. I don't think he's really worth a practice squad slot, I think he is likely a UFL quarterback, unfortunately, which
Sure.
kind of goes to show what he is as a player. But seeing the growth from him the last 2 weeks has been really good. There are a lot of guys I was really impressed with over the last couple of weeks. TJ Smith, defensive lineman, receivers David Moore and Terrace Marshall. David Moore was with Dave Canales in Tampa Bay. Mike Boone, running back. I believe he was with Buffalo for a time, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong. But Mike Boone, safeties Damani Richardson and Alex Cook. Cornerback Deshaun Jameson. He's 5'9", 185, but plays much bigger than his size. He's feisty at the catch point, physical in coverage. Pass rusher Iko Leota, who comes from my home city in Asheville, North Carolina, and then tight end Jordan Matthews, who that might sound familiar for a lot of OG draft fans back in 2014 when he was a former receiver with the Philadelphia Eagles. So Matthews has made a great case to make the 53-man roster, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's him along with a couple other tight ends to make the roster, Tommy Trimble and Jadavian Sanders. And looks like Ian Thomas might be the odd man out for once. As a Panthers fan, seeing him on this team and just not seeing him produce has been kind of frustrating to see. So having another tight end with receiving ability is crucial for this team, especially when you're needing an offense that needs production from your playmakers.
I'm looking at the depth chart here, and there are a lot of former Bills. So is that Jack Anderson, the same Jack Anderson that the Bills drafted?
Yep,
it is.
Okay, so you guys have Jack Anderson and Ike Butker, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay,
I don't know if Ike is going to make the roster though. I think he more was signed as a camp body to kind of fill in that depth role. Unfortunately,
he's a good role player, but he could be on the fringe. And Jordan Matthews had that short stint in Buffalo, and he had an infamous quote that I won't say on air right now, but Jordan Matthews was a former Bill, and Jacob Hollister too, right? Backup tight end.
Yep. Hollister, I'm curious what Carolina does there. I could see him being the fourth tight end on the roster, assuming Ian Thomas is let go at cuts, but I don't know if the Bills really need tight end depth because, I mean, they have Dawson Knox, they have Don Kincaid, so I don't know if Ian Thomas would be a nice addition in terms of his blocking ability in the run game, so I don't know if Thomas could be curious for you guys. I saw someone mention Andy Dalton. I don't see Andy Dalton being let go by the Panthers. He is like, the Panthers need him as their backup. Like in week 3 of last year when Young was down with an injury, Dalton came in, threw for about 300 yards in that offense, and against Seattle defense that wasn't that great, but at the same time having that veteran backup behind a young talented quarterback in Bryce Young, that's important. So yeah. I don't know if they add a third quarterback. I think they may stash one on the practice squad, so we'll have to wait and see on that.
Along the same lines of former Bills, you guys have Dane Jackson at cornerback. Now, looking at the depth chart here, is he going to be starting for you guys this year?
Yes. But at the moment, Dane Jackson is actually dealing with a hamstring injury. He is essentially questionable for week 1. And to be honest with you, I don't think he plays week 1. I think you're going to expect to see him probably week 2. Dave Canales said it was going to be about closer to 3 weeks to a month until Dane Jackson were to play again for this team. So Carolina's depth is going to be tested outside of J.C. Horn, because the biggest thing with J.C. Horn has been his recent string of injuries. He's only played one season of more than 13 games, which was 2022, and he played like one of the better corners in the league. If he were to be healthy, J.C. Horn transforms that entire secondary. He is that good of a talent. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Panthers are tested at cornerback. I want to see some of these guys in uncomfortable situations, how they handle that, how they handle getting beaten coverage initially, but then showing the effort to have recovery speed and make a play on the ball if able to get your eyes around, make some plays. So that's one of the biggest things I'm looking at for this cornerback depth chart, because outside Dane Jackson, it's in terms of outside cornerbacks, It's Deshaun Jameson and DiCaprio Boodle. So 2 names that not a lot of fans are going to be familiar with unless you're a Panthers fan. So Panthers are going to be tested at cornerback pretty early. And it's unfortunate that the Panthers weren't able to secure Stephon Gilmore. He had mentioned he wanted to return to Carolina, but I think money indeed played a factor, and Carolina was basically a discount to what Minnesota. And I don't think Carolina was going to want to pay Stephon Gilmore that type of money. So it is what it is, but expect the Panthers, since they are number 1 on the waiver wire, to be aggressive with any player that comes available. There's going to be a lot of churning at the bottom of the roster, and probably the middle tiers of the roster. You could see some guys week 1 that weren't even on the team this week. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Panthers do over these next 5 to 6 days.
Got a fun question for you. What, if any, they may be willing, do we have in the number 1 waiver wire pickup in a week from now about exactly? It's going to be fun. Cuts are earlier this year from the by and large. It's fairly early for, player can really latch on to a new team. So the Carolina's going to have their advantage there in that regard. However, teams might be calling Carolina with knowing they have the number 1 waiver and maybe wheeling and dealing. Can you see, is there anyone on, just humor me, is there anyone on the Panthers, maybe a strength position that you have across the roster that could be wheeled and dealed for a player-for-player trade, like a lower end, obviously, player-for-player trade? Do you have anyone, remotely interesting available in Carolina?
So Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer, beat reporter for the Carolina Panthers, shout out to him. He mentioned Terrace Marshall Jr. as a potential player-for-player candidate to be traded. Terrace Marshall Jr. has plenty of talent, and it's been evident in camp. It's been evident in camp for probably the last 3 years. Yep. But the production has not matched that. The playing time has not matched that, and he's not been able to latch on with previous coaching staffs. So it's going to be. I'm curious to see what Dave Canales is going to do with Terrace Marshall. If he were to make the roster, it wouldn't surprise me if he just stuck along, and if Canales were to try to get him involved in the offense somehow. But Marshall would be someone that would say he could be a player-for-player candidate. Now, the safety room, that is the deepest room on Carolina's roster, without a doubt, in my opinion. You got 3 potential starters in that room right now. Well, of course, the projected starters, Xavier Woods and Jordan Fuller, and then you have Nick Scott as basically your backup safety. Along those lines, you also have Sam Franklin, a key special teams player who's currently out with a broken ankle, I believe, and he's going to be out or actually a broken foot, and he's going to be out until probably October. So Panthers looking at some of their young safeties right now, like Damani Richardson and Alex Cook, but I could see Nick Scott be a candidate for a player-for-player trade. I don't know if the Bills are in need of safety help, but if they do, Nick Scott could be an option. However, from what I've seen in camp and from the comments made by Evero, it doesn't sound like Scott's going to be someone that's going to be tradable. He sounds like a player that's going to be sticking in Carolina for a good bit, and especially if Carolina were to roll out some 3 safety looks, Scott will likely be a part of that.
Interesting. Okay. Terrace Marshall's a guy I can go back and I think that there's some similarities to a bill that could be interesting. The Bills are weak in a couple positions. Safety's one of them, but only because of injuries. But, we don't really know yet. We'll kind of diagnose some of our injuries later in our show, but safety is a banged up position. They drafted Cole Bishop, a guy that many really like. And then Mike Edwards, a guy they got over from Kansas City, who's played in that 3rd safety role pretty often. Both are out now. DeMar Hamlin's hurt. So the Bills are rolling with just Taylor Rapp at the safety position. So there's much to be said that they could maybe acquire a safety based on those injuries. And then receiver, they have MVS now with a neck injury. And they just haven't really had anybody behind their top 3 that they're pretty excited about. And then Mac Holland is a guy that's going to fit in nicely in that middle role. But they absolutely could make a trade at the receiver position. That is not out of realm of possibilities that they do. But I got to get your opinion now. What's your opinion on Joe Brady? So somebody that, has some more crossovers here and has seemed to find a home here. And the Bills did not, he was said to have some interviews. The Bills did not want to let him go. The Bills did not lose under him really that much last season when he took over for Ken Dorsey. Just had a really great running game, really effective in 12 personnel and utilizing Josh Allen, and then really good in the playoffs as well. Bills' defensive injuries got up to them against Kansas City, where they really still should have won. But what are your opinions on Joe Brady and what he was able to do with kind of a turmoil situation?
When Joe Brady was hired as offensive coordinator, I did think it was probably a year early for him. And just the whole David Tepper for hiring his true first head coach with Matt Rule. We all know how that tenure turned out. And then Joe Brady being fired towards the end of the season in 2021, right as they had signed Cam Newton to another contract for his little short-term second tenure. So, I have a lot of great things to say about Joe Brady. I think he used Curtis Samuel the way he should have been used. And I'm very excited to see what Curtis Samuel can bring to the table for the Bills. I think he's going to be a true third down converter like he was in Carolina under Joe Brady. Now, Joe Brady, I still maintain this. He probably was maybe a year or two early to be an offensive coordinator in the NFL. And despite that, he did an impressive job. He had, I believe, three players on his 2020 offense that had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage, which is very impressive. DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, and Mike Davis. So he's going to get the best out of his players and his skill talent. And him transitioning over to Buffalo to become the quarterback's coach, I think that was a blessing in disguise for him, because I think he was indeed the successor he would have been the eventual successor for Ken Dorsey should he either been let go at the end of a season or he were to move on to a head coaching gig or a new offensive coordinator gig somewhere else. So Joe Brady, being elevated to that offensive coordinator role and seeing how that offense performed late in the season last year, that showed me Brady's ready now to be an offensive coordinator. I think he's going to do a lot of good things for this offense. I'm really excited to see Joe Brady as Bills offensive coordinator this year.
I got to ask you about another guy specifically on the offense here, because he was one of my favorite prospects going into the draft, and that was Xavier Legette. I was a huge Legette guy, and the Bills could have had him, but then they traded back and they opted to go with Keon Coleman. So how is that going for the Panthers? Because I'll just say on the surface, it seems like they have two athletic freaks with Jonathan Mingo and now Xavier Legette. I don't think Mingo did much last year, but could you just speak on both of those players, specifically Legette?
Yeah. So Legette, I would say he is going through the rookie growing pains. He wasn't the most polished player coming out of South Carolina. And he wasn't entirely a popular pick, at least from what I was looking at my timeline as the Panthers made that selection, even approaching the draft. But what I will say is that Xavier Legette is going to have a significant role on this team. Maybe not early on, but as the season goes along, once the team gets a better understanding of what they have, and especially with Xavier Legette, he will likely end up ending the season as the team's starting Z receiver, assuming Deontay Johnson gets a potential extension at some point this season, more so depending on his play. Xavier Legette has been dealing with an injury. I believe it was a shoulder injury he was dealing with that kind of kept him out for several practices. So he's been kind of getting going again. But when he has been able to practice and when he has been able to showcase his talent, it's there. His route running ability has improved. The work ethic from this summer has shown that he has gotten better as a route runner, and especially with in-breaking and out-breaking routes. So he's a player that's going to have a couple extra steps, especially when he's breaking down, and that's okay. Every receiver runs routes differently. You're not going to have someone that's going to break off a route in an instant. I mean, I feel like that's something we're so accustomed to with some of today's best route runners that we just expect other receivers to do it. But for Leggett, he is become a really solid route runner throughout camp. But I will say this, Jonathan Mingo has certainly jumped him as the number 3 receiver on this team, or maybe even the number 2 receiver on this team. Wow. Jonathan Mingo has had, I think he's been the MVP of training camp. What he has done this summer has been more than I expected. He has exceeded my expectations to the point where I think he's going to be very productive this season. You're going to see him in run after catch situations for once, where again, Canales is going to bring in that get your players into positions to where they can succeed. So you see the flashes, the flashes of run after catch ability from Mingo. You see the ball skills too. So that makes me excited about Mingo's prospects for this upcoming season. And to be honest with you, I'm going to switch over a little bit to Adam Thielen because, if the Panthers start phasing him out at some point later in the season, maybe even towards the trade deadline, he could be a potential trade candidate. And I know the Bills could be a possibility as a potential trade candidate. They need a veterans receiver at later midway portion of the year. But to be honest with you, I think Thielen will likely end up staying on the roster through this year and then potentially become a free agent this upcoming offseason. But with Thielen, you have a veteran receiver, just catches everything that comes his way, even though he is slow as heck right now. So he will likely be the starting slot receiver. But I'm going to make a prediction real quick. Your starting receivers by the end of the year for Carolina, you're going to have Mingo in the slot, you're going to have Leggett at the Z, and then you're going to have Johnson as your X. So those will likely be your starting receivers by week 18. I expect those 3 to be the starting receivers, and Thielen kind of phased out, assuming Young gets a little bit comfortable with this group of receivers.
Is Thielen primarily a slot receiver?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way he can play on the outside right now. He was not great on the outside last year. Like, he did not fit playing the perimeter or the boundary at all. I mean, the speed isn't there anymore. He has some quickness, but he's going to be open, even if he isn't, just because he is so good at catching the ball just anywhere. He has good catch radius, just great hands overall. I mean, it comes down with everything. So I'm not exactly worried about him making plays on the ball. It's just he is more now limited to that slot role because where he is in terms of his age, where he is in his career, that's the type of player he is right now. He is no longer a perimeter receiver.
So you're thinking that if Mingo can keep ascending, he's going to push out Thielen, and then you have Johnson and Leggett on the boundary?
Yeah, that's a very real possibility just because of what I see in camp and also what the offense could provide this season. Panther fans have had a concern even throughout the summer that they don't have that deep ball receiver, but they don't really need the deep ball to succeed offensively. They just need explosive plays that can happen anywhere, anytime, through all sorts of different route concepts and just with different routes in general. So you'll see some explosive plays from Mingo. You'll see some explosive plays from Leggett. You'll see some explosive plays from Johnson. But when it comes to like just throwing up a go ball, you're not going to get that consistently just because Carolina only has really playmakers and not true burners. The only true burner I would say is on the roster is Amir Smith-Marset. And I think he's right now on the outside looking in just because of some of the performances from Terrace Marshall Jr. and David Moore on this roster so far. And plus, you're going to have tight ends that are going to be needing some playing time as well. But then that also puts a little bit of a hassle with the punt and kick return game. So it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out over the next 5 to 6 days. I really want to see Smith-Marsette show some ability in the passing game against the Bills this weekend, because if that's the case, Smith-Marsette makes the roster. I could see Marshall getting traded or even being waived and potentially on the waiver wire.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's so much synergy here. I mean, there's always have been since Sean McDermott came over and Brandon Beane. And Brandon Beane's now executive tree now and obviously involves Morgan and Joe Shane. We had a good look into that on Hard Knocks, but they were basically the Brian Burns trade and everything else from that regards of, the Brandon Beane tree. And he keeps really close, accounts with his former executives. And, it's growing. Like, he's got a couple of general managers now in this league. I don't think it's far-fetched to say that, Brandon Beane is one of the best GMs in the league. And from there, having a confidant like Dan Morgan, I don't think it's crazy that they could do a player-for-player trade based on someone that Dan likes from our roster that he's seen in the past. And Brandon's pretty honest with him, saying, hey, he's not going to make our roster. What do you want for, Terrence Marshall? Something like that could make sense, especially if you have some of those wide receivers like Moore and Marsette really pushing. It makes sense that you roster them and then you get something out of someone like Terrace Marshall. So I could see a little bit of that finagling. The Bills definitely will finagle at the end of their roster. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that, as well as on Thielen, because Josh Allen loves receivers like that. Regardless, if he's just quick, he doesn't need to be fast. Josh Allen doesn't necessarily need fast. Look at Keon Coleman. When it comes to quick, though, if he still has some of that at all, it could be a match to where Josh Allen's able to put the ball on him. If at some point Carolina's like, look, we're going to keep all these guys. What would you give me if we made a swap right now? So that could be interesting to look at the deadline based on where you guys are at or before. It is a name I've kept an eye on. I thought that would always play super well with Josh Allen in the later portions of his career. So it was really interesting you brought that up, because I wasn't even thinking about that along the lines. But we'll take off with this question for you. How did you feel when you swapped with the Bills to come and get the fifth-year option on Leggett, and picking Leggett over someone like whoever else may have been there that you liked, whether it was Ladd McConkey or Keon Coleman, or were you just from a pure draft perspective, what were you thinking when you saw your names pop up at the end of the first round, knowing that you just traded up a spot with the Bills? What was going on at that point?
So here's a little funny story I want to start off with real quick. I was at a draft party that Thursday night, because, I was expecting the Panthers pick Friday night, just going out with a friend of mine, Ricky Raines from Cat Crate blog. He and I went to that draft party together. And at the end of the night, we end up leaving, and I get in an Uber, head home, just watching the draft on my phone. And then I get the tweet notification from Ian Rappaport. The Panthers are trading up with the 49ers. And I'm mid-conversation with the Uber driver about the draft. And I'm like, excuse me, sir, real quick. I've got to cover this draft selection real quick. So we'll try to pick up the conversation here in a few minutes if we can. But besides that, I really didn't have an issue with whichever direction the Panthers went with receiver. I was a fan of Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, Jalen Polk, and Xavier Leggett. I wouldn't have an issue with any of those guys. Xavier Worthy, if he were available at 32. I wrote an article about it for Cat Crave back in March. I was like, the Panthers really couldn't go wrong with their selection at receiver. And it felt like from the word go, Panthers had a huge interest in Xavier Leggett. And I'm sure you remember this, Kevin. He kind of spoiled Carolina expressing their interest, we're going to take you at 33 or something like that. So they always liked Leggett from the start. I was a fan of the pick. I think he is the future X receiver on this team. He has that physical and athletic ability to do that. He has some of the tools to improve as a route runner. He also has that second level gear that is very underrated. And we've seen some of those plays where as soon as he catches the ball in space, he can split defenders and take off. I believe he ran a 4.39 right in the draft, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So I mean, he can move. And that's what Carolina wanted. They wanted a playmaker. Xavier Legette is a playmaker. He's a alignment versatile playmaker who you'll see sometimes line up in the backfield. I think you're going to see some backfield reps with Legette. I don't know if he plays this weekend. I just want to point that out real quick, but we'll see. I think he does need at least a few snaps here and there this weekend just to kind of get that repetition. But with Legette, I really didn't have an issue with the pick. My expectations for him just get to at least 600, 700 yards receiving, about 4 or 5 touchdowns during the year. I think he is someone I think Panther fans will, or at least a portion of the Panthers fan base will warm up to as the season goes along, because if Legette becomes a successful receiver, and considering the school he went to South Carolina in Columbia down I-77, so he could end up being a very big time fan favorite on that roster very quickly. So I was a fan of the pick. I didn't have an issue with it. I knew what his concerns were, but at the same time, I knew Panthers got a playmaker at receiver, and that's all that matters. And that's what matters for Bryce Young too. He needs all the help he can get, especially after last season. I think everyone can admit, while Bryce Young did struggle at times, there were still plenty of instances where he had no help whatsoever up front, along the boundary. I mean, outside of Adam Thielen, there was really nobody else, unfortunately.
Very interesting. Jared, where can we find your work? I know we've talked about it at the top of the hour, but what do you got going? Are you at camp? Do you cover the team? Like, tell me about what
I do not. I actually live in Asheville, about 2 hours away. Yeah. So I don't get the chance to travel out that much, unfortunately. But whenever I do, I'll likely be going out to some games throughout the fall. But you guys can find me on Twitter or X at JRod NFL Draft, and especially on Threads. If you have Threads, it's at the same handle. I do most of my work for Panthers Wire now. Recently just signed with them a couple weeks ago, and now I'm also doing stuff with Zach Goodall at the Jaguars Wire, along with some high school sports content for a local paper in my area called the Mountaineer. So shout out to the Mountaineers, shout out to Haywood County for allowing me the opportunity to write for basically my home county. So looking forward to having a busy fall and to provide some great content for you guys.
Jared, we're going to follow along. Maybe we're going to get you on against the Jag. We're going to get your perspective, like a true subjective, like, no rooting interest in that game. So we're going to get you on when they play the Jags in a few weeks, actually Monday Night Football, week 3, I believe. So we'll get you on and get your opinion as your, your raw take from it at that stage. It'll be fun at that point to kind of get a different perspective from the Panthers. And we'll take all that and we'll kind of watch and see what happens over some crossovers with a lot of players we talked about. Maybe a trade happens next week. Maybe a trade happens at the deadline. And we're obviously going to always follow Legette compared to Keon, compared to Worthy. So there's definitely going to be some crossovers there, at least now, again, for the foreseeable future. But Jared, we really appreciate you coming on, and we'll maybe see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully Jaguars are in a good position to have a great matchup on Monday Night Football. I'm hoping for a good matchup that weekend.
It'll be a good one. Thanks for popping on, Jared. I really appreciate your time. We'll see you soon.
Yes, sir.
So that was Jared, one of our favorite guests, now covering the Panthers and the Jags. So it's really cool to get an opportunity to check him out and what he's able to do over there with all the different teams that he's covering. So maybe we'll see him again on the show when we play the Jags in a few weeks on Monday Night Football. But I think what everybody's been most interested in seeing will be banged up Bills, will be Dr. Kyle Trimble. We're going to go through that in a moment here. But was that the real Marquez Valdez-Scantling, by the way? Like, it was his profile picture and it was his name, and it was like a response that could have been him. I don't know. That was weird. Maybe it was MVS.
I doubt it, but never say never.
I don't know. I thought it was interesting if that was the real MVS, because we had just talked about him, and we're going to talk about him a little bit more here shortly. But let's bring up Dr. Kyle Trimble now, one of the fans of the show. Kyle, thanks for coming on. I mean, hey, you're the star of the show. We just talked about preseason game 3 with a Panthers guest, and now we get to talk about probably what people care about a little bit more. And I'm sure you're doing your rounds right now on everybody's network. But appreciate having you on, Kyle.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, so we got some positive reactions out of camp, at least from what I would appear to be positive on a few players. Start at the top at the quarterback position with Mitchell Trubisky, and with that big bulky knee brace he had on. That didn't look very good. What are you thinking right now when it comes to Mitchell Trubisky and what the Bills need to do there?
Trubisky, Trubisky, he's gonna be out for a while. I know that when he was running in the second quarter, he got taken down. The injury didn't look all that major. Like, I thought it was a mild MCL sprain, just the way the leg was hit from the outside and the way he went down. And then he continued to play another few plays on it before he got pulled for Ben DiNucci. You didn't think much of it. You're like, okay, DiNucci wants to get in and get some playing time. And then you hear week to week, and then you start seeing the sleeve and everything else with that, and realize that it's probably more significant than that. So he's probably looking at least a grade 2, potentially even a grade 3 MCL sprain. We're talking weeks, if not months, to return there. If it's a grade 2, you're looking at 6 weeks. If you're grade 3, you're looking at 2 months, and maybe even a little bit longer than that. So I can see him being a short-term IR candidate and then coming back maybe midway through the season. It's unfortunate, but if you saw him watching practice today, walking around, he did not have any flexion in the knee. It was stiff. You could just tell he just does not want to be out there, and it just hurts like no other. But it just that's the reality of the football. Playing football and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. And we don't want to get just your injury takes. So what happens? What do the Bills do now? Like, what should they do at QB2? I mean, that seems long enough to where it doesn't seem like, I know a lot of people are interested to see Brown, but it doesn't seem like that's the solution. So knowing what you know about just the injury and the player in general, like, what are you thinking the Bills need to do at that QB2 spot?
You hate giving up some type of draft assets or developmental players, but you might need to get somebody who has some have done something in the league here. I was trying to think of a better word than that, but there's not at this time. They just need to find somebody who has proven themselves. I've seen some different players out there. None are great. The one thing comes to mind is maybe CJ Beathard. He's done some things in the league. I've seen Taylor Heineke. I think you need to bring somebody who has at least started games, has at least can manage the system for the time being, and has worked in different systems there too. It's not ideal situation, and you might need to give up something for some of these guys, but it's better than I think what we have right now. DiNucci's fine. Brown, he can learn, but there's a reason why these guys are not in the league or they're playing in the XFL. I mean, they're NFL players, but they're fringe NFL players.
Yeah, for sure.
Kyle, so before we had Jared on, Kevin and I were talking about this backup quarterback situation, and I showed him this list here. Jody Biasi tweeted it today. And we were going through some of these names here, and you mentioned some of them. And the two that we kind of settled on were Tyler Huntley and Taylor Heineke. But then we were saying that maybe the Falcons don't want to give him up just because Kirk Cousins is coming off his injury and Michael Penix is a rookie. But do any of those names intrigue you? Because I agree. I mean, the Bills have an extra 6th-round pick from the Boogie Basham trade last year. And if Trubisky's going to be out, I mean, like, is it almost a definite in your mind that he's done for week 1? And probably weeks 2, 3, and 4.
The definite is pretty. Oh yeah, he's definitely done for week 1. There's just the way he's walking around, and just what they're saying week to week. I really don't see them getting him back out there. Even with a brace, he's not gonna have any mobility. I think the only reason he's able to play at all is because swelling hadn't quite set in. I'm sure he felt the pain and felt the instability in the knee, but I'm sure once that swelling set in, it was like, hey, this isn't gonna happen. So. Yeah, they need to find somebody else. I mean, hope that, break glass in case of emergency. But if we walk in with Ben DiNucci and Anthony Brown, I'm scared.
So do any of those names intrigue you? Because I think that the Bills need to go after a dual threat quarterback, someone who can kind of emulate what Josh Allen does. And like I told Kevin, there's only one Josh Allen. But I think Tyler Huntley could be interesting because he is the 3rd, if not 4th string quarterback right now in Cleveland. So you might be able to get him pretty cheap. Mm-hmm. And we were saying before that maybe you just wait until a week from now from cutdown day. But if you want to jump ahead and get ahead of the curve here and get one of these quarterbacks in the room now with the thought of either A, playing in the game on Saturday, and then B, just getting him up to speed as quickly as possible because September 8th is getting here rather quickly. maybe they do want to shed one of those draft picks because it really might be worth it.
Looking at those names, I mean, some of the names intrigue me. Your Trey Lance, Zach Wilson. The names itself intrigue you, but I mean, the product on the field does not. So, yeah, maybe you do have to trade for the Cleveland quarterback and see what you have. I mean, that guy's at least been healthy and is proven to play all right when it's called upon. The other guys have not proven what they can do on the field there. So some of the names, if you just look at the name alone, intrigue you, but I'm not crazy about any of the names right now based off the production they've given.
Yeah, I feel you. I'm kind of with you. I don't know what they're going to do. We'll see as this kind of all unfolds and if they use that short-term IR spot with Trubisky, which seems likely. When it comes to the receiver position, we have Curtis Samuel and MVS. MVS with the neck that was said to maybe be a stinger, but now it's like a neck sprain. Doesn't seem great. Like I thought it would be a little shorter term than it seems to have been. And then as well as what's going on with Curtis Samuel, are we okay with week 1 there? Or are we like really looking at having 3 receivers on this roster?
I'm more optimistic about Samuel at this point, just because he'll have enough time. He'll have almost a month to recover from the toe injury because he did sit out last week, missed the game. And so when I look back and look at the game film and then looked at when he started sitting out, I'm pretty sure the injury happened on that Monday. So he has what I counted was 26 days to recover, which is ample time to at least give you an honest opportunity to heal up the toe, even if it is a mild, moderate sprain of the big toe. As for MVS, I'm sure he has stinger. I'm sure it's hurting like no other. But the fact that it said neck sprain, that tells you some ligaments are damaged in there. Now, what severity of the ligaments are damaged, we don't know. We won't likely find out. But I had highlighted in my article at bangedupbills.com some possibilities of the ligament damage that does happen when you get like a neck hyperextension, the head whip back like that with a whiplash. Ligaments do heal up. They take time. It just, is that enough time for the ligaments to heal up for week 1? I can see them sitting on MVS for a while, whether short-term IR or even just, hey, we're putting you on active roster, make you inactive first few games as you recover. So maybe they can get him back and, maybe missing 2 games instead of the 4. But with cervical stuff, you don't want to screw around with that. I mean, there are criteria to get guys back to returning safely, but you don't want to see something linger. I don't recall him having any neck issues coming into the Buffalo, like his past buckle injury history, but he can certainly have underlying issues with chronic issues that it's never really caused him to be on the injury report, but still deal with some stuff. So I'm more hopeful on Samuel because the time frame, and then we just don't know as much about MVS.
Curtis Samuel was turf toe, right?
Yeah.
So what exactly is turf toe? Because I've always heard about it, but I don't know if I'd be able to. I mean, I definitely wouldn't be able to define it as good as you can. So I'll just let you do that, I guess.
So what turf toe is, it's the sprain of the big toe, your great toe, and it's just a forced hyperextension of the toe. And it happens when they land on the toe. Imagine you land on your toe and then your foot kind of falls up over top of it, or they're trying to sprint or step and somebody falls on the back of your heel. So it's that forced hyperextension. And so every time you go a sprint through the balls of your feet there, you're putting that toe into extension and you're pushing off it. And you need a whole bunch of power. So when you have a sprain there, you lose that leverage off the previously supportive toe, and then just constantly keeps getting reaggravated. It gets swollen up, painful. They can put a stiff sole in there. They can tape it up. They can do different things to help mitigate it, but it's just something that usually lingers and just really needs time to rest, which often they don't have during the regular season.
Where does
an
athlete
one of those
feel
things?
it? Like, do they feel like at the ball of their toe? Like, where do they feel it?
Say that one more time.
Where does the athlete
where
would they feel the pain?
They're going to feel that in the ball of the toe at the head of the metatarsal. So that's where basically the ball of the foot, where the base of the toe. So if you push the toe all the way back, and then that ball of the foot there, that's where they're going to feel it the most, because that's where the stress of the joint is being taken through there. So I've never had it before, but I've talked with other people who have, and it's not fun.
Is it one of those injuries that will reoccur? I don't want to say quickly, but is there a chance if he were to rush back and play week 1 that he could re-injure it? And then you're looking at maybe a short-term IR stint for him too, just because they rushed him back?
You're saying for Samuel, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you broke up for a little bit there. So yeah, absolutely. If he try to rush back and push it too quickly, he could certainly aggravate it. You got to wonder if that's the same thing that happened to Chase Claypool, that he was trying to push to get back and out in the field, and it just got re-aggravated. And they said, "Hey, thanks, but no thanks." I know they won't do it with MVS with do his contract and whatnot, but you certainly don't want to rush it and get it back too soon, because then you're gonna have it lingering, and then you've paid all this money for lack of production.
Makes sense. As you kind of look through the roster now, as we're making our final roster decisions, like I just can't see the Bills rostering more than 5 receivers. But if you factor in MVS and what's going on with Curtis Samuel, like they're gonna have to probably roster the 6th guy now, right? As you make your roster, yeah.
I would think so. You have to, or you have to do some roster shenanigans. I mean, I anticipate them using the 2 IR spots they have now available to them on the last day of preseason. And then in addition, doing some of those parking lot deals, because you can move guys back and forth around and, make sure you get as many guys on IR as you need to, but still maintain, your roster.
The 2 deals you're talking about, are you referring to, are you capped now at 2 parking lot deals? Or are you saying you can do 2 IRs on the final cutdown day now?
You could do the 2 IRs on the cutdown day, and then you can move any other injured guys to the active roster. And then the next day, you can cut your guy that you need to, and then you move your injured guy to injured reserve, thus protecting their ability to return to the season, and then sign your guy back like Reed Ferguson or, Deion Jones or whoever else is a vested veteran that can just sit in the parking lot for a day.
Do you get 2 IR spots that you don't have to mess around with now? Is that new?
Yeah, well, they get the 2 IR designations, where they can designate, say, hey, we're going to move 2 guys over that they don't have to move them over. Like they can just basically put them on IR, move them over, and then they're not part of all the roster transactions. Before, you had to make
the shenanigans.
Yeah, the shenanigans. So it would be nice to say, hey, we're going to designate these 5 guys for IR and move them all over, but it's 2. It's a way that them to still say, hey, you still have to jump through some hoops, but this makes it easier. So they still count toward, if they return count toward your 8 returned during the season. But this at least allows them to not have to cut guys for contract issues and things like that. Just saves basically 2 guys from being cut.
You should be able to do that with whoever, like especially at the end of the last cut down. I get like messing around early on in the offseason. But like on cut down day, you should be able to.
It's the NFL. They've gotten better with it, but there's still a lot of improve.
Yeah, on the injury front. I mean, look, it doesn't. They have 8 maximum anyway. So if they're going to put 8 guys on IR right now, I mean, they still have to manage how many they can bring back in the year, and there's going to be in-season injuries. So I don't really see the manipulation you could do. I guess you could stash young players. That's kind of the worry. I think is that you can start IR in like Justin Shorter every year, or some of these guys that you want to stash. So I get it a little bit, but I think it hurts them more.
It's a possibility they could do that. Yeah.
So I get it, putting a little bit of pressure on Bean to not be like, you can't just IR Bale Inspector, who's always hurt. As we got, limited time with you, let's kind of go to the safety position. Obviously, we'll jump around. I mean, there's not too much more to talk about. The offensive line's been healthy, except Will Clapp left.
Quentin Morris too.
And Quentin Morris. So I guess Will Clapp, probably not great for his outlook. I already had him being replaced by Van Pran Granger. That may be the final nail in the coffin, as well as I like Tylen Grable a lot, and I think they'll keep Lyle Collins. I really do. So that may be it for Will Clapp. Quentin Morris, does that push Zach Davidson on the roster, or where are you at with Quentin Morris?
Morris, he's a good – Morris is a good question, because, I thought initially when he exited the game, I said, okay, I'm out AC joint sprain. And then said week to week, I'm like, what I saw in film isn't matching what they're saying now. And so I went back and looked, and there was a play right at the end of his playing time, and he landed with his arm outstretched, kind of landed on his elbow as he tried to pull it back in to brace himself. That could have certainly caused a labral tear. And if you have a labral tear with a tight end, you have to worry about catching, blocking, catching in traffic. Just there's a lot of things you have to do with your arm, and you don't want to worry about that arm when you're going to block, and all that force is being pushed back up through the shoulder and potentially subluxing, which is partially dislocated, or getting a full dislocation, causing further damage to the labrum. So the two things could possibly happen. They could put him on IR now and end the season. They could put him, actually, I should say three things. They could put him on IR afterward and try to give him a surgery and maybe have a really late season return, or he tries to play through it with a shoulder harness and then just kind of struggles. I mean, we've seen guys do that before. They get by. I know with the tight end 3, they're going to be more of a blocking tight end, but he needs to make sure that he can get what he needs done without sacrificing, his availability. Because, I mean, if he goes down on game day, who do you have? I mean, you got Reggie Gilliam, but you don't want to be putting Reggie Gilliam out there as tight end 3 unless you need to. So I think they're making some determinations, figure out what they want to do, but it's not looking great for Morris. And it's a shame that if he does lose the tight end battle, you don't want it to be due to injury.
For sure.
He's out for multiple weeks, it sounds like. Like, this isn't going to be one of those where he could.
Yeah, that's what they were saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm definitely not. I mean, I've had Reggie Gilliam and potentially freeing up some cap money, maybe on the outside of getting cut. It wasn't. I've had some thoughts on how they could save it, especially if you listen to Matt Smiley today on WGR say that they may be keeping bigger guys for kickoff returns now, that they don't need all the speed on the way that the units are. And I think that plays a role in keeping a Grable on as an offensive tackle, as your draft choice. Do you need to have Reggie Gilliam anymore? Maybe they do. But I think that and maybe now the Quentin Morris injury totally changes the opinion. But much like receiver, though, with this injury, do you have to roster Zach Davidson? I mean, at this point, 2 and a hurt Quentin Morris when you run a lot of 12 is pretty risky.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, not having him, that's going to be hurting things a lot. But you roll with what you got, and maybe Davidson can step up, or Trey McKitty, or somebody else.
Yeah. Cool. Real quickly, let's get to safety. And I mean, there's not a ton. I mean, obviously, we're hoping for a Matt Milano return late in the season. Everybody's been talking about December. Everybody that is in this thinks that could be a realistic option. Nicholas Morrow did return, doing some positional work, and then he did a lot more today than he did yesterday. So it looks like he may be ready for week 1 by the sounds of it. But we got to get into the safety role where we saw Mike Edwards return, we saw Cole Bishop return looking good. Hamlin was off on the field doing his stuff alongside an athletic trainer. Give me your best input on safety. I mean, there's a chance all 3 of them in some capacity are on the week, obviously ready week 1.
Yeah, so for safety, I mean, it does look like they're all going to be peaking, hopefully at the right time, at least for week 1. I'm hopeful about Bishop just because that unconfirmed report that was a fractured scapula. If that's the case, it just takes time to heal back up. His biggest thing is just understand the defense being a rookie. But if he can get back out there, maybe get in some packages, maybe you can get by with him. Edwards, he had noted that it was a pretty significant hamstring strain, and he didn't want to go try and push to get back because he could really aggravate things. And he was coming off the shoulder surgery as well in the off season. I don't have the exact details of what the shoulder surgery was, but he's just missed a lot of time already, and he's been on the field for 2 days. So it's promising to see him out there, but he's still favoring that right side a lot. And then DeMar Hamlin, I know he said that the hamstring was something minor, but he's been moving around pretty good at practice. So I think maybe the week-to-week designation was just a little hedging your bets that, hey, we're not going to push these guys. We have the time to keep them out. Let's get them healthy. They could all be coming back at the right time, and then they still have Taylor Rapp that's going to help man down the other safety position. So I think they'll get somebody out there and be able to perform week 1. It just stinks that all of them are dealing with different injuries all the time at this, during the preseason.
Who's your best guess that starts next to Rapp week 1?
I feel like Hamlin. I feel like he knows the system the best. I feel like Bishop's really at a disadvantage being a rookie, and then Edwards just hasn't been out there. Get him out there working his way in. I'm sure he can understand defense, but Hamlin's actually played in defense, and he played well when Micah Hyde was out there.
Do you think that they can all be ready for week 1?
Can you repeat that? It broke up there.
Do you think that all 3 of those safeties can be ready by week 1?
Do you think all 3 safeties will be ready week 1?
Yeah, I think they all could be ready week one. It just might come down to your knowledge. And, that's where Edwards and Bishop have a disadvantage, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
But
we'll
physically,
see.
I think they could all be ready.
We'll see. Will they give the Bernard trust in any of them? Neither of them have had the opportunity to be in this defense like Bernard sat out. But Bishop looks to be right in the mix of everything. He's doing individuals. He's been in OTAs. He's been there through a lot of camp, at least some of it. So I think a shocker is McDermott rolls out Bishop week one. That's my back end shocker where he's going to prove next to Rep, who they feel comfortable with, and a lot of other people around the defense.
That would be a big shocker. But
that's my shocker, Kyle. Is that they roll with Cole Bishop week one? I think that was the plan. Obviously, the injury set that back. But I really think that you'll see him, if not week one. I really feel confident very soon. He'll take over that safety role. So hopefully, this injury, low chance of return. That's kind of a freak injury, right?
Yeah. There are instances of if it was a fractured shoulder, there are instances of that, but they don't happen often. And there's a wide variety of whether guys play through them or whether they miss a little time or if they miss a whole season. So it just depends on if that is a fractured scapula, where it is in the scapula, and then kind of what positional demands of it are.
For sure. Anything else we missed? Anything else you want to include before we get you out of here? Anything else that you noticed that we didn't talk about?
I think the only person we didn't talk about was Matt Milano, but I think that's been beaten like a dead horse. Yeah. You mentioned December return. I was on right here, right now with Alex Brasky the other night, and I know he mentioned Dr. David Chow, who was a friend of mine, suggesting a late November return. I thought that might be a little aggressive, but Dave's dealt with this before. He's dealt with it. He does surgery on these guys like that there. So if he can return sooner, great. I also know that the Bills aren't going to be one to rush guys out there. It is reliable surgery, but if you can keep him out, give him as much time to rehab as possible. And then, especially if Bernard and Williams and anybody else holding down the fort is doing well, hey, you don't have to rush him back. Get him back for the playoffs and you get a fresh set of legs, especially with that knee or the leg injury he's coming off of too.
Yeah. Buffalo Joe making the roster?
Does he make the roster? God, man, I want to see if he does it one more time. I think you have to put him on the roster, just especially with the depth issues they have at linebacker. But man, he's making a compelling case. But that's what happens when you're given the opportunity. You got to take advantage of it there. If he doesn't make the roster, he's gonna potentially be picked up by somebody else if they're having linebacker issues, or maybe he gets on the practice squad. But it's a one game. We've seen guys do great on one game and then they kind of peter out. If he does again against Carolina, even 75% of what he did, I don't know how you don't put him on the roster and at least try to get him that experience, and then you figure it out from there. Dr.
Kyle, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure we'll have you on sometime soon. Really appreciate you giving us a good 20, 30 minutes of your time.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime.
And it's a good breakdown. There's a lot to talk about. I was hoping there wouldn't be early on and we looked promising. But now we have to actually make roster decisions based on a lot of this stuff. And it's going to get tricky and complicated at a lot of these position groups. And we find out in 6 days exactly how this all turns out. But enjoy the last preseason week. I'm sure you're busy with all the AFC injuries. Is that what you're working on now? What do you got going on as we hit week one?
So I'm working on the AFC injury stuff. I just track all that stuff because you can see how they make decisions like the Bills are based off of the injuries that are happening. The Dolphins are dealing with a ton of stuff too. Jets are actually in pretty decent shape. Patriots, they're just being the Patriots right now, which I love to see because they're not good right now. But they're dealing with their fair share of injuries. But the issue with Dolphins and Patriots is everything's undisclosed. So I don't know what's going on with them, but I'm still working on the Patriots or the Bills stuff, and I'm doing some fantasy football work for DL Fantasy. I mean, I'm a busy guy, and I guess it's a good problem to have there, but still.
Well, we'll get you out of here. Thank you so much. We'll probably request your presence later on at some point in the middle or early this season as some of these injuries start to come to fold. And unfortunately, hopefully not, but unfortunately, we may have to talk about a few other things. But really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for joining us.
It's inevitable, but I'm here and I'm willing to talk about it, and it's a passion of mine.
Thanks for jumping on, Kyle. You're not one that thinks there's anything wrong with the staff, though, right? Isn't that a goofy argument? Okay.
No, yeah. I think it's a really lazy argument because they got all praise when they're also healthy, and then when they're not healthy, oh, you got to get rid of them. It's like, then who are you going to replace them with? I mean, Buffalo's not that big of a city to go replace a whole staff like that. And then on top of that too, they've proven that they can get a whole bunch of people back. They've they've done the work to get guys back and get them done well. And anytime you see somebody not doing well is because usually the injury is more complex, your ACLs and Achilles, things like that. But no, those guys are good for a reason. They are 100 times smarter than I am, and they know what the hell they're doing. And I wouldn't get rid of them unless you start seeing something. You would need like 4-13 season. You would need constant hamstring injuries, like just everything hitting the wall where I say, hey, hard reset. But like, no, you don't get rid of them. They're too good. They're well established, and you need that trust between the players and the training staff in order to get the best out of them every week.
And beside Milano, you're talking about stuff that like week 1, week 2 here, like minus Milano, like a kind of a weird injury on Quentin Morris. I don't know what's going on with Trubisky, but outside of that, like it doesn't seem like there's anything crazy here. Last year, you had the Milano injuries. I mean, tackling a dummy.
There's only so much you can control.
There's not, in my opinion, but we'll see. Well, I mean, you're right, unless there's some other things that pop up. But Kyle, thank you so much for coming on with your expertise.
Of course, anytime.
See you soon, man. Thanks for popping on. Dr. Kyle Trimble, one of the best in the business at doing this and being able to break down injuries and his opinions and what he's done. It does his research with all that kind of stuff. Kevin, give us your kind of takeaways on this. Are we making roster decisions now based on that injury news? Doesn't seem like they need to get crazy, but they need to do something at this receiver tight end more than anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to come down to a lot. I mean, we've talked right along, like, are they keeping 5 wide receivers? Are they keeping 6, maybe even 7? I think 7's out of the cards now, but I think it's going to be between 5 and 6. And I'm really interested with tight end too, because Quentin Morris, like, are they just going to have to put him on IR at this point?
Think so. At least short-term IR. I think they have a reason to keep Davidson and stash him anyways. But ultimately, we'll end up seeing what happens with it. But I do think Morris is probably going on short-term IR. Maybe he plays through it, but already a guy like, I don't know, is he the guy you're going to make play through that shoulder injury? I mean, maybe. I do think it makes Gilliam safer as well. Just the whole compilation of things going on here between the limited receiver thing going on mixed with the tight end of Quentin Morris being hurt. I think Gilliam, where my prediction was maybe they save some money and open a roster spot. I think all those things happening around him will push him onto the roster. And I think that the quarterback that backs up the Bills isn't currently on the roster. That's my opinion as we approach cut down day coming soon.
I kind of think so too. Like, I feel like the Bills should either trade for one or wait for the waiver wire and pick up one and then just put DiNucci and or Brown on the practice squad. Like, I doubt that they're going to make Ben DiNucci QB2 and just sit there and do nothing. Because, like, if Trubisky's injury is as serious as Kyle was saying, you can't be satisfied with that QB room right now.
No, I don't think it's DiNucci. I think DiNucci's goes to QB3 or DiNucci versus Brown. Maybe they pick Brown. I don't know. But one of them is going to go as QB3 for sure, 100%. They're going to pick their favorite QB3 out of those two. And I personally think that QB2 is not on the roster. I don't think it's going to be DiNucci Brown. I think it's going to be DiNucci or Brown and then a QB2. I mean, that's kind of where my takeaway from it.
So do you want to make a quick 53?
I think we can do I think we're out of time, or a quick 5 or 10 minute one. We don't have to get crazy with like breaking down each position, but maybe we could do a quick one. As the next time we'll be on air, guys, we're going to push our show up to Tuesday next week. We're going to do draft cut down live reactions here and break down everything. We had our initial 53 projection right the day before camp, but now we're going to give you kind of a quick react, and then we'll actually release it on Twitter as well. But we're going to be live on the reactions next week. And as always, the show is brought to you by the Summit Center and Dave Dengler and Larson-Timko. So we really appreciate our show sponsors and Monster Energy for sponsoring all of Built in Buffalo. But Kevin, let's do a quick one. Starting at the QB position, obviously Josh Allen, Mitchell Trubisky going to IR, and a quarterback not on the roster. Is that where we're at there at QB?
Yeah, so we're doing it by the player, right? Because I still have this sheet from a couple months ago, I think. And we listed the positions with numbers by each one. So I have 2 listed for quarterback, 3 for running back, 1 fullback. So we did it from a numbers point of view, but like now this is crunch time. So like we got to do it by the player, right?
Right. And we did the players at that point. I think that was the one from a month ago. I think that was the one from the training camp opening, wasn't it? I believe.
I think so, yeah. So, I mean, we'll use this as a reference because I would agree with our mid-summer, early summer projections. They're going to keep 2 quarterbacks on the roster. It's just a matter of which 2. So, Josh and Huntley, Heineke, Trubisky.
I don't think Huntley's or Heineke's going to be available. I think Trubisky's going to IR. I think they make a move for a quarterback, and they do it next week, early next week, to get him up to speed. I'm going to go Huntley. Let's just say Huntley. I mean, there's no better guess. So let's go Josh Allen and Huntley, Mitch Trubisky on IR, and
DiNucci on the practice squad.
Sure, we'll go DiNucci on the practice squad. That's fine with me.
Okay. Yeah. So 2 quarterbacks, and then getting into the running backs.
3? I think that's now. Yeah, I think that's the 3. I think that's pretty much locked up with Ty Johnson coming back and showing something. Ray Davis obviously is running back to James Cook. I think that's pretty much a lock.
I do want to come back to this though, because if there's a chance to put Darrington Evans or Frank Gore on, I think that we might have to consider it, because I was very impressed with how they ran the ball Saturday night. But it's going to come down to a numbers game. And I remember that's what we said a few weeks ago when we did this. So for now, we'll say those 3 and then Gilliam as a fullback. But we might have to circle back.
Yep, we'll circle back to that if there's a position. At receiver, I'm going 5, man. Like, I just don't see enough from some of those, with Claypool going down and Shorter not doing anything. And Hamler looks like he's not going to win the return job. It looks like he's going to Hardy. I don't know. Like, I think the Bills need to pick a roster spot and go 5. But are you still rostering Shavers or Hamler? Or what are you doing behind the first 4? I think they still roster MVS. What are you thinking?
I was going to say, are you putting MVS on IR, or are you just putting him on the roster? And like Kyle said, you can just make him inactive for
I'm putting him on the roster and inactive. Yeah.
Quick question. How many guys can they put on the IR?
As many as they want, but Kyle just said that you can only put 2 on as now to begin the season. But then you can do the practice or the parking lot cuts, where you cut Reed Ferguson and you keep a guy on your roster and then put him on IR. So you can put as many guys as you want on IR, but if ineligible to return, they have to make the roster minus the 2 exemptions they now give you.
Okay.
So you can only put 2 guys on IR that can return. If they want to return more than that, they have to start doing the parking lot shenanigans of, okay, you're getting cut, etc.
I was going to say Trubisky and Morris, but you have Milano for that. So it's Milano and Trubisky, and then Quentin Morris. Should we jump ahead to tight end? Like, what do you do with Quentin Morris?
I got him on IR. He's one. I got.
Is that a parking lot cut then?
Yeah, you got to have a parking lot third for a parking lot cut. I think you need to have 2 parking lot cuts. So I think that you go the 3 guys we're talking about, and 1 parking lot cut at the moment, but you're probably going to need, is there another parking lot cut we're going to need? Maybe you're going to need 1 or 2 parking lot cuts. Reed Ferguson is usually one of them. Who?
Do you think you have to do that with Spector? Put him on IR? Did we talk about Spector with Kyle? Did he give his diagnosis? I forgot to ask him about Spector.
We didn't talk about Spector. He didn't bring him up, so he didn't seem overly needing to bring up Spector. But
is he practicing again, or is he still hurt?
Dude, I told you every year we try to put him on our roster. I just leave him off now because he's always hurt.
I know. I'm almost leaning towards just saying, sorry, man, Joe Andreessen's looking pretty promising and he's healthy. You can't stay healthy, so we're just going to cut you outright.
Spector made he was off doing additional work with athletic trainers off to the side riding the bike. So he's somewhat getting closer.
Okay. Well, we'll get to linebacker in a little bit. So going back to tight end and wide receiver. So I guess we'll start with wide receiver. So the top 4, Coleman, Samuel, because it sounds like he could be ready by week 1, Shakir, and Mac Hollins. I didn't think he was going to be this high, but here we are. Mac Hollins is probably looking at wide receiver 4 right now.
Yep, easily.
And MVS, we're going to put him on the active roster, so there's 5. You don't think that they would put 6 there with Shavers and?
I think they put a bunch on the practice squad and call them up for the first 2 weeks while MVS is gone. That's what I think they do. So I think they cut Shavers or Hamler or Isabella, if MVS isn't ready week 1, they do that practice squad elevation. That's what I think that they do. I don't think they need to roster one of those guys. That's my opinion. So I'm going with 5. I don't think any of them have earned a roster spot because we're going to need to pull it from other positions. I'm going 5 at receiver.
I still want to lean towards 6 because I feel like with Quentin Morris going down now, I think it's still going to be 3 tight ends, right? Because we were thinking maybe you could stretch it to 4 tight ends. But I think it's going to go back down to 3. So it's going to be
right.
Kincaid, Knox, and Zach Davidson. Do you agree there?
Yep. McKitty goes to the practice squad. Yep.
Okay, fair enough. So I would still lean towards putting Hamler or Shavers. What? Justin Shorter. I mean, I don't want to forget about him, but I haven't really seen much from him.
Yeah, I don't think you can put Shorter on the roster. He's going to the practice squad for sure. I'm
going to say KJ Hamler for now as wide receiver 6. But
yeah,
again,
it's 50-50. Like he could be a cut that they make and then bring back to the active roster or put on the practice squad. He could be one of the quote unquote parking lot cuts, and then they determine if they're going to put him on the practice squad or the active roster. But I agree. Like it's probably most likely if they go that route, I would probably go with Hamler as well. I think that's the most likely. He was getting really great cover or separation today, apparently. I think he dropped one in the end zone from what I read, but he was definitely getting separation in front of Brandon Beane from the looks of it. So I'm going with 5. But whether they roster him or put him on the practice squad, either way, that player would be elevated from the practice squad week 1. So really what his status is doesn't matter. But I think we'll need that spot, and I don't think the Bills really value having Hamler on the roster over the practice squad, but we'll see. I wouldn't be shocked either way. I'm going with 5 though.
Okay. Let's keep that open for now. What do you have for offensive line?
I think that after Smiley's comments today of saying that you're going to use offensive linemen now on kickoffs, he actually told us that. I'm going 10 offensive linemen. Where were we at? Were we at 10?
We had 10. So I mean, the starting 5 it's not even a question anymore. Like Connor McGovern's the starting center. So there's no competition there. So it's Dawkins, Edwards, McGovern, Torrance, Brown. I'm thinking you got to put Grable on, right?
Yep.
So Grable and Ryan Vandermark as the tackles, Van Pran Granger and Alec Anderson as 8 and 9, and then Collins as 10 with Will Clapp.
I think it's pretty solid at this point. That's the 10 that I think it's the 10. And then you're going to put like Richard Garage on the practice squad, maybe Keaton Bills. But I think that's a rock solid 10 in my opinion. I think that's
because I mean, La'el Collins can play inside or out, so that kind of covers that from the Will Clapp. He can't play center like Will Clapp can, but you have Alec Anderson and Van Pran Granger to do that.
Yeah,
so
you're good at center.
Okay, so that's 10. I remember we had 25 on offense when we did this a couple months ago. So is it 24 now with you saying that there's only going to be 5 wide receivers?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're going to need to keep an extra DB, I think. But we'll see how the numbers turn out because you're going to go with 5 receivers. You're going to IR Quentin Morris. You're going to have 3 tight ends now. So we had 4 and we had 6. We had 6 receivers, 4, 10, 2. No, we couldn't have. We had 4 tight ends. Did you include Gilliam as a tight end?
No, I had Gilliam as just a fullback.
Okay.
So
if we have 10 offensive linemen, 2 quarterbacks, obviously that's 12, 3 running backs, that's 15. Gilliam is 16. Now you're going to go with 5 receivers is 21. 3 tight ends is 24. And then, right. So that's 24.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll jump to the defense and then we'll see if there's one more spot. Cause then it might come down to like, DB versus KJ Hamler.
Right. So defensive lineman, I think, is pretty straight up. I think the way that's kind of shaped out to be, we'll do it all together here. I think it's the four linemen. Austin Johnson, we didn't ask about either, but Carter, Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, those 4 defensive tackles, the 4 starting defensive linemen or ends, Smoot, Miller, Epinesa, Rousseau, Javon Solomon's probably a lock as well now, in my opinion. So that's, you're going to go with the 9th there. Did Kingsley Jonathan do enough to make the roster? Deshaun Williams? Are we going to go with either of those?
So how many defensive ends do you have right now? 4?
5 with Solomon.
Okay, so it's Rousseau, Epinesa, Von Miller, Dwayne Smoot. Is it Dwayne or Dwan?
Dwan Smoot.
Dwan Smoot. Okay. Solomon, I think, yeah, like I wouldn't consider him a complete lock, but I think it's more likely than not that he makes it. So there's 5. And then is it between Kingsley Jonathan and Casey Toohill?
Probably, yes. I would say so.
Based on what I saw the other night, I'm going to go Kingsley, but you might just be able to put him on the practice squad because I think they signed Toohill for a reason. So, I mean, we'll say 6 defensive ends and 4 tackles. So there's going to be 10 defensive linemen, just like 10 offensive linemen. But for the sake of this, I mean, we probably have to figure out which one it's going to be. So do you like Jonathan or Toohill?
We'll go Jonathan for now. Let's go Kingsley Jonathan. It could go either way, but we'll go Kingsley Jonathan, and they think that they could put Toohill on the practice squad. That's probably the way they go. But Toohill had some sacks last year. They could flip it on us, no problem. So we'll have to see. That could be a final decision they make, but we'll go with Kingsley Jonathan for now. That's fine.
So that's 34. So moving back to the linebackers, Milano, unfortunately, on IR. So it's going to be Terrell Bernard, Dorian Williams. And here's where it gets interesting. What do you do past those 2?
Dude, I don't know. I think you keep Nicholas Morrow.
I think you have to. Like, I like Nicholas Morrow a lot, especially with the Matt Milano injury, because I said right along, Morrow seems like the Terrell Dodson, like that third linebacker who can play in a pinch. He's done a little bit of everything throughout his career. He had 100-plus tackles in 22 and 23, I believe, if not 21 and 22. Either way, it was with Chicago and Philadelphia. So he can do a little bit of everything. He's that veteran voice that you need.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say that Morrow should be a lock. I think Yola Focio should be able to make this team. So there's 4. And then is it between Deion Jones and Joe Andreessen?
Probably. Yeah, that's what it's always been, in my opinion.
And Balin Spector?
So you're thinking 5 linebackers?
I think 5 linebackers, and then when Milano comes back, that would be 6. But obviously, he's not on the team now. So I'm thinking it would be between Andreessen, Jones,
I'm thinking Buffalo Joe makes the roster, Deion Jones to the practice squad. That's what I got.
Okay. Wait, you say Spector and Jones in the practice squad?
I think so.
Okay, I'll go with that. I'll go with Joe Andreessen.
Yeah, I think we go 5th with Andreessen. They could keep a 6 there. I think we're going to have a roster spot still available. So now you can go with Hamler or with Spector. You go with Hamler, Spector, and maybe a DB. We'll see where we're at numbers-wise, but we'll just go 5 for there. So that's only 16 on defense between the front 7.
It's funny. Now. We had 5 linebackers when we did this originally because we said Balin Spector always gets hurt, so let's just put him on IR to make it easier.
Yep, it's going to be some version of that anyways. Let's go to DB real quick, and then we'll circle back to see if we have any open roster spots for Hamler or Spector. You're going to roster wrap Hamlin, Mike Edwards, Cole Bishop, and I guess Cam Lewis is the 5th safety, right? So that's kind of the 5 there. I mean, I think that's pretty solid.
Wait, say it again. So it's going to be Taylor Rapp, DeMar Hamlin, Mike Edwards, Cole Bishop. Yeah, and Cam Lewis has that. Yeah, okay. So we'll just list Cam Lewis as a safety. He can do a little bit of everything, but to make it easier, we'll say 5 safeties.
Yeah, we'll keep him as a safety. And then corners is Benford, Rasul Douglas, Kyrie Elam, Jamarcus Ingram I have on the roster, Taron Johnson, and Daquan Hardy for 6.
Okay, so 11 DBs.
Yep.
And I think we had 10 before.
Okay.
So actually that might match up because if we're having one less wide receiver, now we have an extra DB.
That seems to be where we pulled from, yeah.
Oh, yeah, because you know what we did? We kept Cam Lewis and got rid of DeMar.
We did. We cut DeMar. Yep, I remember.
So now it's essentially based on that. Do you want DeMar Hamlin or KJ Hamler? I'm taking
based on our preseason. Yeah. Based on our pre-training camp, and I think Hamlin's on the roster. So I think the team
Hamlin or Hamler.
Hamlin is on the roster. Hamler is going to the practice squad. I think our roster is pretty solid. Like obviously Buffalo Joe may be a reach if they go with Deion Jones, or with Spector they could. But that gets us to our number 11 DBs, 11 front 7 players, or 11 defensive linemen. That's 22. Is that what we went with? We went with 11, and then the 5 linebackers for 26.
Wait, 11. We had 10 defensive linemen.
We had 10 defensive linemen, 5 linebackers, so 15. Yep. And then the 11 DBs, so 26. Yeah, okay.
26.
So that's the roster. Yeah.
26, 24, and then Reed Ferguson, Sam Martin, Tyler Bass. There's your 53.
Yep. So it does come down to Hamler versus, I guess, one of those DBs. But look at the roster. We're already 5 linebackers, so they can't really slim there. Kingsley Jonathan's there, though, so they could make a move on Jonathan or Buffalo Joe to make room for Hamler. I think everyone else is safe, though. Like, beside Jonathan and Buffalo Joe, I think the rest of that is pretty much. So I guess they could make a move on Grable if they wanted and then go with 9 offensive linemen.
Or Lyle Collins.
Lyle, maybe, with this cap hit. I don't know. But I really think that's it. I think that Grable, Lyle Collins, maybe. I don't think so. Buffalo Joe or maybe Kingsley Jonathan. Those are the 4 that I have right there. But also, like, who would you be putting on? Like Hamler, I guess you could cut one of them. I just think that they maybe like those other 4 more than they like Hamler. But the MVS injury could play a role in it. If MVS can't go at all, maybe they do feel like they need to roster a 6th. But you can also still elevate that Hamler or Shorter or Shavers while MVS is out for a week or 2. So you don't have to stress and put Jonathan through waivers or whomever it may Grable through waivers. I just ultimately think one of those receivers that's going to be 3 to 4 receivers on the practice squad, and they'll elevate them for as long as MVS is hurt. That's where I'm at.
So I guess just to conclude and wrap everything up here, if it were to come down to it like the way we just kind of laid it out, it seems like it's going to come down to KJ Hamler, Tyrell Shavers, maybe Justin Shorter if you want him, and then Casey Toohill, Kingsley Jonathan, Joe Andreessen, maybe Balin Spector. Like, those are probably the bubble players right now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think DBs are too important. They're not going to put Hardy or Ingram through waivers. They both played well. They're both an important position. People claim DBs. I just don't think they expose. Cam Lewis is on the roster. Hamlin made the roster. I just don't think that they're going to mess at DB. They're going to keep those 11. I think that's pretty solid. If you don't keep Hamlin, so you're going to keep 4 safeties, 2 of them being coming off of injuries. I just don't know that you're going to only have Rappin and Cam Lewis ready. I don't know. I personally think they keep 5 because Lewis is such a hybrid special team safety corner. I think he's safe. I don't know who you're cutting.
I think you have to keep DeMar just because of the injuries and the value that he adds.
They're keeping
and
Hamlin,
speaking of value, like if you want to look at it as 3 nickels, maybe okay, there Cam Lewis, he becomes a cornerback, Swiss Army knife, whatever. So whether it's 4 safeties or 5 safeties or 3 nickels or 5 boundary, I mean Daquan Hardy, he could be a boundary corner too. So maybe if you want to put Cam Lewis in the slot, you say it's Taron Johnson, Cam Lewis. Those are your 2 nickels. You have 4 safeties, and then you have 5 boundary corners because Hardy's been getting looks on the outside. But I just don't see a world where they keep less than 11 DBs based on how we just laid this out.
Yeah, I don't either. I think our roster is pretty good. Maybe they do go a Spector or Jones over Buffalo Joe. Maybe they go Toohill over Jonathan. But Jonathan, they've seen him get claimed by Chicago in the past. I think he has more likelihood to get claimed than anybody else. So I think maybe they do keep Jonathan. They do keep Grable. These offensive linemen keep getting claimed, like Jack Anderson. Look, he's been playing well. They got to keep these guys. Grable, Jonathan, maybe Buffalo Joe now with that film out there. I don't know. You keep these young players. You put these vets on the practice squad now, especially now that you can keep 6 true vets on the practice squad.
I would much rather give up on Deion Jones and Balin Spector as opposed to a guy with a lot of upside like Joe Andreessen. And that's not totally giving up on them because, like you said, it's just you think that it's more likely that you can get them on the practice squad because you might get a team like, let's just say Kansas City, because I think Andreessen had a workout for them when it was around minicamp time. And you put out that kind of film where you're tackling Jalen Warren in the open field, you're going to get a lot of teams paying attention. So I think it's more likely than not that you can get someone like a Deion Jones back on your practice squad than it is Joe Andreessen.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we'll see how likely you are, but that's our roster. We're going to roll with it. I think you can just keep these receivers on the practice squad. I just don't think anyone's claiming Shavers. I just don't think anyone's claiming Hamlin. You can't. I mean, he's a vet. So I don't think anyone's claiming any of these guys. You can keep them all in the practice squad. If there's ever pressure, you can bring one up, make a roster move. And hey, maybe this final spot or two comes down to this Panthers game that we talked with Jared about. Ultimately, maybe if Joe shows it up, I think someone would claim him. He put a good enough film out, Kevin, against the starters. Once again, it's not the prototypical experience of a player playing good as a running back against these bum defensive linemen. It's literally him tackling Jaylen Warren in open space and Justin Fields and making great plays.
And like reading it perfectly too.
Right. Ultimately, maybe they do try to get sneaky and send him to the practice squad. And everybody else can call him and say, dude, come play here, even on the practice squad. You're not guaranteed to get him on the practice squad. Somebody like San Francisco, making an example, can say, yo, man, learn our defense, you're going to come up the next day, and maybe he sees a better fit there. So he would be in demand being waived, even if he's not claimed. And then maybe he does choose Buffalo. He's got the Buffalo connection. But ultimately, he will have the option to choose, if he's not claimed, to choose where he is. I've just seen linebackers claimed in the past. I think it's truly just running backs and receivers that everybody loves their own, but I don't overly see these guys get claimed at the running back and receiver position as much as we think that they do. So,
oh yeah, I said circle back to running back. So
yeah, no chance. There's no space for it. I think Evans and Gore go to the practice squad. Period.
Because then you would have to subtract. There's Andreessen or Kingsley Jonathan. Like you're not taking away a DB.
Yeah, it'd be Jonathan.
So Kingsley Jonathan or Darrington Evans.
Sure. Yeah.
I think I got to take Jonathan, right? Because they like the rotation, and you already have the rotation of 3 running backs plus a fullback. You could probably put Evans and Gore on the practice squad. So I think it's pretty good the way it is. I have one final question for you.
Sure.
With this quarterback situation, are you waiting until next week to see who gets cut to sign one of those guys and try to put a waiver claim in? Or are you trying to get ahead of the curve and maybe right now, after the show, you're Brandon Bean. He's watching our show right now. He's going to call the Cleveland Browns and say, how about a 6th-round pick for Tyler Huntley?
I think they just know that they have to cut 2 of these guys. I don't even know that they keep Dorian Thompson-Robinson either. Like, I think Jameis Winston and Deshaun Watson are enough for them. They're going to try to get Huntley or Robinson through to the practice squad. So I just think you leverage your bet. But yeah, I mean, you could make a call to Cleveland and say something like that. They don't have a 7th-round pick this year, so you would have to trade that Boogie Basham 6th. I mean, the Bills could call around and get the best player they can get for that 6th-round pick. It's not crazy that they would.
I think I might do that because, as I already alluded to, you get him in the quarterback room and get him on the team as soon as possible to give a little bit more depth for this Saturday and just to learn the system for week 1 on September 8th. But then B, it made me think, like, the Bills have to put waiver claims in, right? And I think they go based on the previous season record. So you said Carolina's first in the pecking order, right?
Right.
So, like, Buffalo wouldn't get a chance until, what, mid to late 20s to get the quarterback that they want. So if you want to go get
draft order, so
yeah,
20, late 20s.
So if you like a guy, like let's just say it's Huntley or Heineke or even Trey Lance, you might just want to say, you know what, we do have that extra 6th-round pick. You can have it because this is valuable to us.
Yeah. So I think we're good, man. Like, I think that's a good roster. We'll circle back live before we go through the cuts next week. We'll see how we did. That'll be part of the show. We'll be here going through all of our cuts as soon as we can get on air on next Tuesday. We're going to move our show up from Wednesday to Tuesday, but to all the 450 live viewers, we really appreciate all of you here live right now with us.
Smash that like
button. Anyone listening on demand, thank you. We broke down the Panthers a little bit. It was good to hear some opinions from the outside. All those connections there were fun. Summit Center, Larson-Timko, and Dave Dengler. Really appreciate you guys as well. But we'll be back at you next Tuesday, moving the day up just for a day to talk about the live cut down day next Tuesday, which is a little bit earlier than normal. So we got a lot to talk about with you here live on the Going Deep Buffalo podcast. But I'm Kevin. That's Kevin. Thanks for tuning in with us for over an hour and 45 minutes. But we'll see you on cut down day to actually bring this roster to life and maybe put some finishing touches with some of these injuries. But until then, we'll see you next week.
Go Bills.